All right, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be looking at properly outfitting a ship for combat. Now, this ship, the Federal Corvette, is, first of all, it's a large ship, it's an expensive ship, but most importantly, it's locked behind the Federal rank grind. Now, I'm going to talk about that probably in the next episode, but it is my current combat ship of choice. Now, I've spent a little bit of time outfitting it, but I really wanted to give you kind of a deep dive on some of the best ways to, make sure that you're going to increase your survivability, your ability to stay on target, general damage, and also mitigating incoming damage. There's a handful of ways to do that, but I'm going to talk about my preferred ways today, and hopefully it'll help you when you really start diving deep into combat. Now, the last time we talked about combat, we were using just a super basic, scrape whatever you can together build. Now, the reason why, and I've mentioned this in the last episode, the reason why I've kind of eliminated the price aspect is because now that we've talked about core hunting, I've given you guys the tools to really earn all of the money you could ever want. Again, the only thing standing between you and a fully outfitted Anaconda is time spent mining. So if you have any issues getting cash, definitely go check out the core hunting video. It is super in-depth, probably longer than it needs to be, but longer than it needs to be, like everything else on this channel, eh? But anyway, that will get you all the cash you could ever want. So, let's focus on today's topic now, after a wordy intro. And I'm going to start, actually, with the utility mounts, as opposed to the hard points. Now, utility mounts are really great ways to just kind of generally buff up your survivability, and you can turn a ship into a straight-up fighter, more of a support ship, shield tank, and you can provide very specialized defenses, okay? Now, you'll notice on these shield boosters, I think somebody in the apartment above me is learning how to tap dance today. So you'll notice that next to these shield boosters, they have the little nut icon. That means that they've been engineered. And I will talk about engineering later because it's a super important part of the game. But for all intents and purposes, just consider engineering right now a general buff. So you'll see the shield boost is plus 20, kinetic resistance plus 5, plus 5, plus 5. So that is all of my engineering values added from these shield boosters. And this is cumulative, by the way. This is a summary of all of the shield boosters. So we're adding 20% to my shields and all of that extra stuff. But diving in, you'll see we have a whole bunch of options here. Now, today I want to talk specifically about the shield booster, the chaff, heat sink launchers, and the kill warrant scanner. So shield boosters are exactly what it sounds like. They're just straight up more shields. That's all they do. They add shields, and they cost energy to run them. So they cost more power when they're deployed, and they're always deployed, by the way. That's important when you're talking about managing your power output down there at the bottom. Shield boosters are always deployed, unless you turn them off. All right, looking back at the other modifications, chaff launchers. These are kind of cool. Whenever you think of, talk about Top Gun, I think they had that scene where somebody's dodging a missile and they launch flares. That's all chaff is. Chaff is it's basically just like metal that your ship shoots out, and it will disrupt gimbal turret locks, lock on missiles and stuff like that. It'll disrupt all of the tracking weapons. And it's just a great way to increase your survivability. It'll last for about 20 seconds. Well, not about, exactly 20 seconds. And you can use each one a maximum of 10 times. Now, one thing that is a little bit unfortunate about my chaff placement is you'll see that it's right above it's on the top of my ship in front of my command deck. Now, chaff will launch up and behind you. So it's really not a great place to have it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and find these two shield. We can move these two shield boosters to the top of the ship. Now, normally, placement of stuff like shield boosters doesn't really matter. It's not like it's reinforcing the bottom of the ship or whatever. It's just when you talk about stuff like chaff, it will launch a stream of metal particles that can be disruptive to your vision. So it's handy to put stuff like this either behind your cockpit or underneath your ship so you don't have to see it. Now, the heatsink launcher is really nice because it will immediately cool your ship to basically 0% heat. Now, as you're shooting or flying around, boosting, using lasers, all your systems generate heat. And by using a heatsink, it will immediately drain your heat to 0, and it's super handy so that you don't overheat and cause internal damage, or it can also disrupt lock-ons just like chaff because your ship goes cold and it creates a really hot target that shoots out from your ship that will disrupt a lock-on. Generally, I use heat sinks when I'm scooping from a star or using my frame shift drive too close to a star, but it also helps to cool down certain really warm ships like the Mamba. They run very hot, so having heat sinks on board so you're not doing internal damage to heat or from heat is very handy. Now, lastly, I don't have a kill warrant scanner on my ship right now, but if I were going to go bounty hunting, essentially what the kill warrant scanner does is it's a scanning module. You have to scan an enemy for it to work, but it will see if there's any additional warrants on a target, and really that just means extra profit. So if you're bounty hunting, it can be handy to have the kill warrant scanner. I never use it because when I'm shooting somebody, I don't want to have to stop shooting them so I can scan them. I find it a bit of a waste of time. However, it can increase your profit from a bounty hunting spree, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to say is remember that some of these cost ammo. So not the shield booster, the heatsink launcher and the chaff both require ammunition to use. So as you're using it, remember how much you've got left. So I have 2 chaff launchers on board, and I have 2 heatsink launchers on board. Now chaff has 10 units of chaff per launcher, so that is a total of 20. I can fire my chaff 20 times. Heat sinks, on the other hand, have a total of 3 per launcher. I have 2, total of 6. So you got to be wary of how you're using them, and when they're gone, unless you have the materials on board to build another one. But in general, most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about making another. You'll just go back to a starport and rearm. And they will, whenever you hit repair or restock all, it is going to restock your heat sinks and your chaff. Now, heading back to the outfitting menu, let's talk a little bit about hardpoints. Now, hardpoints are really a matter of personal preference. Okay, I typically am always using lasers and multi-cannons. I typically don't stray from that combo. I use the lasers to pull apart shields, and then I use the multi-cannons for finishing a target off. Now, every ship has different hardpoint placements, and you have to think about that as you're outfitting your ship, because let's say, for example, you have hard points in the back of your ship and hard points underneath. Okay, that means that if you're trying to use your hard points underneath your ship, you have to pop your nose up a little bit so that they can get access to your target, which means that your top hard points may not be able to shoot them. So it helps to group, like hard points with like hard points. I keep my guns on the top of my ship and the lasers on the bottom. That way I can always keep one group on target, and I know exactly which side to prioritize based on whether I'm shooting shields or hull. Now, I talked about this a little bit before, but shields are damaged by energy weapons, and hull is damaged by kinetic weapons. And, of course, in this game they call energy thermal, but who really cares? It's semantics at that point. So think about the kind of ships that you're going to be fighting and the kind of ships that might be shooting at you. So I have on here, because I'm planning on hunting some pretty big game, I have a big laser, and then I have some lasers on the side of my ship. Beam laser here, beam laser here, beam laser there, for a total of 3, and they are all going to be able to shoot down, right? And then now I have my big hard points, my multi-cannons, up top. Now, if I were a wiser person, I might swap these large multi-cannons for something else, because they tend to take a long time to spin up. Whenever you pull the trigger on a multi-cannon, it takes a long time for the thing to actually start firing. So something like the small multi-cannons, you pull the trigger and they immediately spin. They don't have a ton of inertia in the barrels. Something like these guys, they take a while to cook up. Okay? It can be useful to go with something that's a little bit more instant, like a cannon or an aimed rail gun. Really, it comes down to personal preference. There are a couple of things that I might suggest avoiding. Specifically, I think you should avoid torpedoes. Now, torpedoes they're an interesting bird. They are heat-seeking, but they have very minimal ammunition, and they do a ton of damage as a result. So, you see huge damage buffs, like I have, 3,300% increased damage. However, I can only fire this torpedo 4 times, and it's done. So it might be a pretty good argument ender. However, would I recommend that as your primary weapon? Not really. I think it's more situational. Now, a lot of people get good use out of stuff like the missiles, but I've never really used them, never really played with them. Again, they're kind of like torpedoes in the sense that the missiles, they do a lot of damage and they track, but you don't have a lot of shots with them, right? So we have 6 in the clip and 36 total missiles on board per rack. So again, it comes down to your play style. Plasma accelerators, these are pretty big, beefy weapons. Never played with them myself, but I've been told that they are very, very handy. Lastly, something to avoid might be railguns, unless you're doing a very specific railgun build. They generate so much heat in your ship that they're not really worth running. Cannons as well, unless you're doing a specific cannon build. They can be quite difficult to land shots with, because the weapon itself isn't hit scan. It actually shoots a projectile that has to travel to its target. And of course, you don't want to have stuff like mines in, you don't want to have stuff like mining tools in a combat build. Yes, they can do damage, but use the right tools for the job. And again, this is it's so down to personal preference that really I would urge you to play with all different types of weapons and see how they work for you. Now let's talk about the core internal slots. Now oftentimes there's a lot of stuff that you can get away with not having a ton of. Now in a combat ship, there's a little bit less wiggle room. I will always recommend that you have a maxed out power plant, maxed out thrusters, maxed out power distributor all the time. And those are the most expensive units on board. They're super pricey, but they give you the most bang for your buck, and it will literally change the way your ship behaves. Having the best thrusters means that you can boost more often, you can turn tighter, you'll be able to stay on target longer. They really are just worth having the best in slot for. And again, sometimes the best available is down a bit. Like, so for example, I have 7A here, but occasionally you'll go to a station that only has up to 6. So you either need to find a station that has the best you can get, or you have to make do. But always, always, always get the best power plant, thrusters, and distributor you can. Now, the frame shift drive, I like having a good frame shift drive. Always. It's just super handy because I like to travel. I'm a weird guy when it comes to this game, because I always, whenever I'm going exploring, I'm using a ship that has a lot of gear in it. I always like to travel heavy. So I always buff up the frame shift drive. Sometimes you need to travel to turn in a bounty. Sometimes you can find a system that's in Civil War. Those produce a lot of really good missions that are combat focused. I like having a good frame shift drive. Now, the rest of the stuff you can go ahead and degrade. And that's really the core internals. They're pretty easy, just maxing out your key components and then degrading the rest. And again, the frame shift drive, you could probably normally degrade that, but or you could even go with less if you're not planning on system hopping. However, I really like having it. Now, the optional internals is really what is going to end up changing a good combat ship into a great one, right? So I have a 7A shield generator. It's the best I can afford to put on this ship. Now, I have cargo racks on board because I use collector limpets when I go to combat. Now, let me explain. When you kill a target, they will occasionally drop materials. Or, well, not occasionally. They usually always drop materials. Now, if you have collector limpets on board, you can go ahead and fire those limpets out, and they'll collect these materials and bring them back. Now, materials are different to dropped cargo. Dropped cargo will count as stealing, and therefore it's illegal. Dropped materials don't. So go ahead, when you're out there, make sure you're adding the cargo that's been dropped, items like bio-waste, whatever, to the ignore list for the limpets, and just focus on collecting the materials. The materials will be used for stuff like engineering. But I don't have any other limpet controllers. I do have a ton of cargo racks on board. I don't need this many. Really, I could probably make do with about 64 cargo racks. Again, I have a fuel tank in here. That's a bad get. I really only used this so that I could get it to a farther system without constantly having to refuel. So let's dive in a little bit and actually tune this to my fighting style. So with the assumption that I am not going to be traveling with this ship, let's go ahead and swap this cargo rack to something useful. Now, what I would do in this situation is I would fit the best shield cell bank you can in this. Now, what shield cell banks do is at the cost of heat and energy, they will fire a concentrated pulse of shield energy that will really quickly repair your shields. Now, these only last per reload, and you'll see by reload I mean restock. So it's a lot like a heat sink or something like that. So you'll see I have a maximum of 4 charges. However, it's going to give me 57 shield per second for a total of 11 seconds. And you'll see my shield strength is 1300. So it's going to restore a ton of my shields while I'm in combat. So I'm going to go ahead and slot that in here, selling the old module because I'm not planning on using that cargo scoop. Now the fuel tank, what would I put in here? If I don't want to use another shield cell bank, I could use something like hull reinforcements. Now hull reinforcements are handy for when your shield gets stripped away because it'll just add more health to your ship. So you'll see my integrity as it stands is going to be a bit below 1400 because you'll see the hull reinforcement is adding 80 to my total of 1526. Now as we go up, it's going to add quite a bit of health. Now typically I wouldn't put hull reinforcements in anything but a quote-unquote military compartment. We'll talk about that in a second. But they can be helpful if you are if you're finding that your shields are getting stripped away and you're doing a lot of fighting. Let's say, for example, you can't afford a really high-grade shield and it doesn't last very long. Maybe try thinking about building a hull tank and adding a lot of survivability to your ship. Now in this case, I am probably going to go ahead and slot in a second shield cell bank just because I don't, being able to fire it 4 times, yeah, it's handy, but they're not, 4 is typically not enough to last a protracted combat session. So let's add 2 in. Now you'll see we're getting pretty close to my maximum deployable power, right? Any more added in and we're going to be overloading. Now we'll talk about this in a second, but you can help avoid that by having a cascade effect of system shutdown. So again, we'll talk about that in a second. Now the fuel scoop is it's really not that important here. Again, this is not a ship that's built to travel long distances, really. I like it to be able to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and leave the fuel scoop in there. But you could come up with something like an FSD interdictor, which will allow you to it'll allow you to pull somebody out of super cruise so you can jump them if you find that they have a bounty on them. And really the only difference between the grades is the range and power draw. Now something that's really fun for me is fighter hangars. I love having a fighter hangar on board my ship. Now not all ships can have hangars, but usually the larger ones can. The fighter hangar is exactly what it sounds like. It's a vehicle bay in your ship that will allow you to deploy smaller fighters that will either help you shoot one target, they'll defend you from other targets, or you can just have them fire at will, and they'll go fight in in the control zone or whatever. Typically, I like to have them either defending me or attacking my target, but you can order them around as you're flying. Now, I have the Guardian Frame Shift Drive Booster. This is a specific item that you get by doing specific stuff, but essentially it's a hidden module that will allow you to increase your frame shift jump by basically a flat rate when you're talking about size. And again, I like my ships to be able to travel, so that's why I have it on board. Now here we're going to talk about the military compartments. Military compartments are special in that they can only contain hull reinforcement, module reinforcement, or shield cell banks. This is specifically a compartment that's built for keeping you alive in a combat situation. Now, in the military reinforcement, or in the military compartments, I typically always put hull reinforcements because I use shield cell banks elsewhere. And most military compartments typically run around the 5 class point. They don't really get much bigger. So I like to be able to put in a bigger shield cell bank and give me greater survivability elsewhere. That's the military compartments filled with hull reinforcement. I'm typically not afraid of my modules because I run with a lot of shields. So, but if you find that your shields are being stripped away and you're taking a lot of hull damage, it might be handy to have module reinforcement. That basically adds extra health to your onboard modules, something like your thrusters, which can be shot out, or weapons or anything like that. The module reinforcements are going to help keep them alive and functional. Basically, it's just a straight health addition. Now here we're talking, I talked a little bit about having cargo racks. It's handy to have the cargo racks on board for stuff like collector limpets. When you're killing targets, they can go out and collect the materials and bring them back to you, and you use the materials for engineering stuff. Finally, the Planetary Approach Suite. It's just always on board. It's what allows you to land on a planet. You can't uninstall it. It's always on board. And then, of course, no ship is really complete without a little bit of dressing. All of this stuff is, unfortunately, things you have to pay for. But I do like being able to dress up my ship a little bit. I've spent a decent amount of cash on it. And if you're wondering about how to actually customize your ship, this is where you go. I'm actually going to swap the Kovas to something else.
Commander. This is Greetings, Commander. This is Greetings, Commander. This is
Go with Alex. And I like my string lights. So you can do a lot of little knickknacks and stuff that help make your ship a little bit more yours. Unfortunately, it's all microtransactions and it drives me up the wall. And you can actually you can outfit your fighters and SRVs the same way. I don't use them because I typically don't fly them. I let the AI do it. Now, if you have a fighter bay, it's super important to go swing by the crew lounge. I forget to do this all the time. Now, I've hired this person, this AI, to help fly the fighters, help fly the fighter while I'm fighting. You need to make sure that they are A, something you can afford because they do take a cut, and B, you set them to active. I can't tell you the number of times I have forgotten to activate a crew member, left, gotten into a fighting zone, deployed the fighter, and realized that I'm in it and my main ship is just tootling around in space trying to follow me. So make sure you have your crew on board. Now, the last thing to do before you head out is make sure that you stock up on limpets. So you're going to go to the restock, limpets, and I'm going to go ahead and grab all 40.
Cargo hold at maximum capacity.
Now, if for some reason you decide that you want to not refill your shield cell banks, I don't know why you would, or not refuel something, you can go into the advanced section under advanced maintenance, and you can literally tick off everything. I kind of like the broken paintwork because it's kind of nice for your ship to age with you. However, do not forget the ship integrity. Occasionally this will, it's your outer hull essentially. And if your ship integrity goes below, a certain point, it's going to start affecting your ship's performance. So don't forget the ship integrity. So now that we're flying, I want to talk a little bit about the power usage bar. Now, you'll remember when we were looking at it earlier, mine was just about full. And that is the maximum output of my ship right there is 100%. And then my usage is 99%. That means that I can use everything at my ship all at once. Now, my ship will get hot as a result of that, but I can turn off certain systems if I, for example, am exceeding my ship's power draw. So, for example, something I'm not going to use in combat is my Guardian frameshift drive booster. So if I swap that to 2, you'll see that second category pop up. And now suddenly my number 1 is not being, my first power priority is not being overwhelmed. This is another rule of flying, is always set your power priorities. So for example, now if I deploy everything and I'm running at we'll call it 102% power, my cascading systems, my power priorities, will shutter each system in descending order, right? So number 3 systems turn off first, then number 2 systems, then number 1 systems. If I were to deploy everything in number 1 and they were overdrawing my reactor, my whole ship would shut down and have to reboot. So always remember to set your power priorities. A couple of things that you can set to different groups would be your fuel scoop, your sensors, even things like the fighter hangar. Just remember, when that shuts down, right, when those systems shut off, you cannot use that until you have enough power to bring them back online. So if, for example, you set your cargo hatch to be number 3 and it's exceeded, you've exceeded your power draw, and you have a hatch full of stuff, your cargo hatch is going to open and dump everything into space. So again, you got to think a little bit about what you're doing and what you stand to lose by setting your power priorities. So in my case here, really all I need to do is I need to shut my Guardian frameshift booster down if I find that I'm in a power negative situation. If I'm overdrawing my reactor, my frameshift booster will turn off and I'm A-okay. Everything else can be set to 1 because it's all stuff that I'm going to want to use in combat and not lose if again I overdraw my power. Now the rest is kind of up to you. I urge you to go out and experiment with all sorts of different build styles, whether or not you want to do a crazy torpedo ship, or you want to do, a railgun build, or you want all plasma accelerators, or you want to do something silly. Go out and give it a try, right? The only thing standing in your way right now is just time and money, which money is earned by mining, and time, how much do you want to mess around? It's always fun to try a bunch of different stuff. I had one boat that was just all railguns. It was an Anaconda. It had, I think, 7 railguns on it. It created a ton of heat, so I had a lot of heat sink launchers, but I'd basically one-shot a ship. And that was kind of fun. So go ahead, try a whole bunch of stuff, see what works for you, and just go out and have fun with it. So the next time we meet, I'll probably be talking a little bit about the rank grind, but until then, I'll catch y'all later.